The dust-coated windows of Dr. Harris's office rattled as Victoria Davenport slammed the door behind her, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the diagnosis paper in her trembling hand. It was 1878 in Paradise, Nevada, and at 22 years old, she had just learned that the mysterious seizures and tremors plaguing her for months had a name: epilepsy. And according to the doctor's grim expression, it was a condition that would mark her as cursed in the eyes of the town. Victoria stumbled down the wooden steps of the doctor's office, her vision blurred by tears. The letter in her hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The words "permanent neurological condition" and "no known cure" burning into her memory. She had come to Paradise just 6 months ago after her father's death, hoping to make a new start managing the small bookshop he had purchased before his passing. Now, her future seemed as barren as the desert surrounding the mining town. She could already feel the stares as she made her way down the main street. News traveled faster than wildfire in Paradise. Dr. Harris's wife, Mabel, was the town's most notorious gossip, and Victoria had no doubt that by sundown, everyone would know about her condition. Miss Davenport. The booming voice of Sheriff Wilson called out to her as she hurried past the jailhouse. "Hold up there. Got a minute?" Victoria paused, hastily wiping her eyes and tucking the doctor's note into her pocket. "Yes, Sheriff." The older man's weathered face showed concern, but his eyes darted nervously. "Just heard from Doc Harris. Says you've got a condition." So it had begun already. Victoria's spine stiffened. "That's right. Well now." The sheriff removed his hat, twisting it in his hands. "Town council's a bit concerned, you understand. Running that bookshop on your own with your affliction might be dangerous. What if you have one of them fits while lighting the lamps? Whole town could burn down." "I've been managing just fine, Sheriff," Victoria replied, her voice tight. "I've only had 3 episodes since arriving and never once endangered." "Now, Miss Davenport, no need to get riled up. Excitement might trigger one of your spells." The sheriff stepped back cautiously, as if she might collapse at any moment. "Council just thinks it might be best if you considered selling the shop, maybe move somewhere with more medical facilities for folks like yourself." Victoria felt as if she'd been slapped. "Folks like myself, you know, the afflicted." The sheriff lowered his voice. "There's asylums back east that handle these cases. Place where you'd be looked after proper." Fury replaced Victoria's tears. "I don't need to be handled, Sheriff, and I have no intention of selling my father's shop or leaving Paradise." Sheriff Wilson sighed, placing his hat back on his head. "Well, that's your choice for now, Miss Davenport, but the council will be discussing the matter further. Good day to you." As the sheriff walked away, Victoria felt the weight of other eyes upon her. Mrs. Gunderson, who had been examining fabrics in front of the general store, quickly ushered her young daughter inside. Mr. Phillips, the banker who had just last week complimented Victoria on her business sense, now crossed to the other side of the street rather than pass her directly. They were afraid of her, as if epilepsy were somehow contagious or a sign of moral failing. Victoria forced herself to walk with her head high, though each step felt heavier than the last. She would not let them see her break, not here in the middle of the street. She had nearly reached her bookshop when she heard the commotion behind her horses' hooves, men's voices, the distinctive jingle of spurs. The stagecoach had arrived, bringing mail, supplies, and occasionally new faces to Paradise. Victoria paid it no mind as she fumbled with her shop key, her hands still shaking. She didn't notice the tall figure watching her from across the street, nor did she see him dismount from his dappled gray horse. She was too focused on getting inside before the tears came again. "Excuse me, madam." The deep voice startled her, and Victoria spun around to find herself looking up into the face of a stranger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. Dust covered his dark clothing from the trail, and a well-worn hat shaded his face. A cowboy, clearly, though something about his bearing suggested he was more than a simple ranch hand. "Can I help you?" Victoria asked, her voice more brittle than she intended. The man gestured to the shop window. "Sign says you sell books. Was hoping to find something to read on my travels." Victoria hesitated. She wasn't in the state to deal with customers, but she desperately needed the business, especially now that the town council was looking for reasons to push her out. "Of course," she said, finally managing to unlock the door. "Please come in, Mr. Forrester." Thomas Forrester. He removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Most folks just call me Thorn." "Victoria Davenport," she replied, moving behind the counter to put some distance between them. "What kind of book were you looking for, Mr. Forrester?" Thorn looked around the small shop, taking in the carefully organized shelves. "Whatever you'd recommend for a man who spent too many nights with nothing but stars for company." Despite herself, Victoria felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Are you partial to adventure or contemplation during those starlit nights? Both have their merits." His eyes met hers, and Victoria was struck by their intensity. "Though lately I've been thinking a good story might be welcome." Victoria moved to a shelf near the window. "Then perhaps Dickens, or maybe Mark Twain's new book about life on the Mississippi. Twain sounds promising." Thorn followed her, keeping a respectful distance. "You know your inventory well." "I should. I've read most of them." Victoria pulled the volume from the shelf, then swayed suddenly as a wave of dizziness washed over her. The familiar aura that preceded her seizures made her grip the bookshelf tightly. "Miss Davenport." Thorn's voice sounded concerned, but distant through the buzzing in her ears. "I'm fine," she managed, but the book slipped from her fingers as the tremors began in her hands. "Just need to sit." Victoria was vaguely aware of strong arms guiding her to the chair behind the counter as the seizure took hold. Unlike her more severe episodes, this one manifested mainly as tremors and confusion rather than a full collapse. Still, it was humiliating to have it happen in front of a stranger. When the episode passed a few minutes later, Victoria opened her eyes to find Thorn kneeling beside her chair, a glass of water in his hand that he must have found in the back room. "Here," he said quietly, offering it to her. "Small sips." Mortified, Victoria accepted the water. "I apologize, Mr. Forrester. I have a condition that sometimes no need to explain," he interrupted gently. "My younger sister had similar episodes." Victoria stared at him in surprise. Had a shadow crossed his face? "She passed 5 years ago. Fever took her, not the seizures. She was 20 when she died." "I'm sorry," Victoria murmured, feeling a strange connection to this man who spoke of epilepsy without fear or disgust. Thorn stood, retrieving the fallen book. "Nothing to be sorry for. Catherine lived well despite what the doctors said. Taught me a lot about courage." He placed the book on the counter. "How much do I owe you for this?" Victoria named the price, still slightly disoriented. As she wrapped the book in paper, she asked, "Are you staying in Paradise long?" "Hadn't planned on it," Thorn replied, handing her the money. "Was just passing through on my way to California, but I'm thinking now I might stay a few days." He studied her face. "Town seems like it might have some interesting stories." Victoria couldn't help but notice how his gaze lingered on her, not with pity or revulsion, but with genuine interest. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her that way. "Paradise has its share of tales," she said carefully, "though not all of them are pleasant. The best stories rarely are." Thorn put his hat back on and tucked the book inside his coat. "Thank you, Miss Davenport. I expect I'll be back for another recommendation before I leave town." As he walked to the door, Victoria found herself hoping he would. In a day filled with rejection and fear, Thomas Forrester's simple kindness felt like finding water in the desert. She couldn't know then that the tall cowboy would return to her shop sooner than expected, or that his arrival in paradise would change the course of her life forever. The next morning, Victoria awoke to the sound of shouting outside her shop. She lived in the small apartment above the bookstore, a cozy space that had been her sanctuary since coming to paradise. Now, as she hurriedly dressed and peered out the window, she saw a crowd gathering in front of her door. Mayor Hollister stood on a crate, his round face flushed with righteousness as he addressed the townspeople. "It's a matter of public safety, friends. We cannot have someone with such an unstable condition operating a business in our town." Victoria's hands clenched into fists. She had known opposition would come, but hadn't expected it to mobilize so quickly or publicly. Throwing a shawl around her shoulders, she hurried downstairs and opened the front door, facing the crowd with as much dignity as she could muster. "Is there something I can help you with, Mayor Hollister?" she asked, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. The mayor turned, clearly surprised to see her. "Miss Davenport, we were just discussing the situation with your affliction." "So I heard," Victoria replied coldly. "Interesting that this situation wasn't worth mentioning to my face until Dr. Harris made his diagnosis yesterday." "Now, Victoria," Mrs. Gunderson stepped forward, her expression a mask of false concern. "We're only thinking of your welfare. A young woman in your condition shouldn't be alone. What if you have one of your fits and hurt yourself? Or set fire to the building?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Victoria scanned their faces, people who had welcomed her 6 months ago, who had bought books from her, taken tea with her at the church socials. Now they looked at her with suspicion and fear. "I've lived with this condition for months without incident," Victoria said firmly. "I'm not a danger to myself or anyone else." "That's not what medical science says," interjected Dr. Harris, pushing his way to the front. "Epileptics are prone to violent outbursts, confused thinking, and moral degradation. It's well documented." Victoria felt her cheeks burn. "That's absurd. I'm the same person I was yesterday before you gave me that diagnosis. The same person who collapsed in the middle of church last month. Called someone from the back. Nearly knocked over the collection plate. And what about when she started shaking at the Founders' Day picnic?" added another voice. "Scared my children half to death." Mayor Hollister raised his hands for quiet. "Now, we're not here to condemn Miss Davenport. But the town council has voted. We believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you sold your business and returned east to be with family who can care for you properly." Victoria felt ice spreading through her veins. "I have no family left, as you well know. And I have no intention of selling my father's shop." "Then we'll have no choice but to revoke your business license," the mayor said, his tone hardening. "Paradise has standards to maintain if we're to grow into a respectable community. We can't have people afraid to send their children into a shop where the proprietor might have a fit at any moment." Victoria fought back tears of anger and humiliation. "That's not legal, and you know it. It's perfectly legal when the council determines there's a public safety concern." Mayor Hollister stepped down from his crate, approaching her. "Be reasonable, Miss Davenport. We'll ensure you get a fair price for the building and inventory." "And who would buy it, I wonder?" Victoria asked bitterly. "Perhaps Councilman Phillips, who's mentioned several times how this location would be perfect for expanding his bank." The banker had the decency to look uncomfortable, but the mayor pressed on. You have until the end of the month to make arrangements. After that, your license will be revoked." The crowd began to disperse, some looking shamefaced, others self-righteous. Victoria stood in her doorway, too proud to retreat inside while they could still see her, too devastated to form any further argument. As the last of the townspeople drifted away, she noticed a figure across the street, leaning against a post outside the hotel. Thomas Forrester had witnessed the entire ugly scene, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Humiliation complete, Victoria turned and went back inside, locking the door behind her. She flipped the sign to closed and finally allowed the tears to come, sliding down against the door until she sat on the floor, surrounded by the books that had been her comfort and livelihood. She didn't know how long she sat there before the soft knock came at the door. "We're closed," she called, her voice hoarse. "I know," came the deep reply. "It's Thorn Forrester. Thought you might want this back." Confused, Victoria wiped her eyes and pulled herself to her feet. When she cracked open the door, Thorn stood there holding the book he'd purchased yesterday. "Why would I want it back?" she asked. "Figured you might need the inventory if you're fighting to keep your business." He offered it to her. "I can borrow it instead if you're willing." Victoria stared at him, then at the book. The simple gesture of solidarity nearly broke her composure again. "Keep it," she said finally. "Consider it payment for your kindness yesterday." Thorn didn't move, studying her face with those intense gray eyes. "That wasn't kindness, Miss Davenport. Just common decency, which seems in short supply in paradise." Victoria glanced past him at the empty street, though I'm beginning to think the town was misnamed. A hint of a smile touched Thorn's lips. "Most places are." He tucked the book back inside his coat. "May I come in?" "Not to buy anything, just to talk." Victoria hesitated. Propriety dictated she shouldn't allow an unknown man into her shop when she was alone, especially with the door closed to other customers. But propriety also dictated that the town shouldn't turn on one of its own based on a medical condition. "All right," she decided, opening the door wider. "I could use some company that doesn't look at me like I'm about to sprout horns and a tail." Thorn stepped inside, removing his hat. Victoria noticed he moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, despite his imposing size. "Coffee," she offered, gesturing to the small stove in the corner where she kept a pot brewing most days. "Obliged," he nodded, taking a seat in one of the reading chairs she kept for customers. Victoria busied herself with pouring 2 cups, grateful for the momentary distraction. "What did you want to talk about, Mr. Forrester?" "I heard what the mayor said." Thorn accepted the coffee she offered. "About revoking your license." Victoria sat in the chair opposite him, cradling her own cup. "Apparently, I've become a danger to decent society overnight." "It's not overnight," Thorn said quietly. "People fear what they don't understand, always have." "Did people treat your sister this way?" Victoria couldn't help asking. Thorn's expression darkened. "Some tried. My father didn't allow it. He was the town doctor in Laramie before we moved to the ranch. Educated man. He understood that epilepsy wasn't witchcraft or moral failing." "You were fortunate," Victoria said. "My father was the same. He never made me feel like I was broken or cursed, but he's gone now and I'm—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice the word alone. "You mentioned you've had this condition for months," Thorn said. "But it seems the town only just found out." Victoria nodded. "I've had episodes since I was 16, but they were infrequent. My father helped me manage them, taught me to recognize the signs. After he died, I came here to start fresh. The seizures became more frequent with the stress, I suppose, but I was careful, until you couldn't hide it anymore," Thorn finished for her. "Yes." Victoria stared into her coffee. I had an episode at church, then another at the town picnic. People started whispering. Then yesterday, I had a seizure right in Dr. Harris's office during a checkup for recurring headaches. He diagnosed me officially, and now—" She gestured to the empty shop. "Now I'm a pariah." Thorn was silent for a long moment, sipping his coffee. "What will you do?" "Fight," Victoria said with more conviction than she felt. "This shop is all I have left of my father. I won't let them take it from me out of ignorance and fear." "Fighting a whole town is hard," Thorn observed, though there was no discouragement in his tone, only pragmatism. "What choice do I have?" Victoria set down her cup. "I have nowhere else to go, Mr. Forrester. And even if I did, running would only confirm their belief that I don't belong in normal society." Thorn studied her with those penetrating gray eyes. "I admire your spirit, Miss Davenport. Reminds me of Catherine." Something in his voice made Victoria look at him more closely. "You were close to your sister, raised her after our parents died," he said simply. "She was 10. I was 18. Kept the ranch going, made sure she had everything she needed. Taught her to ride, to shoot, to face down anyone who looked at her sideways because of her condition." Victoria suddenly understood the depth of character behind his calm exterior. "That's why you came in here today. I remind you of her." Thorn shook his head slightly. "No, madam. Catherine was all fire and quick tempers. You've got a quieter strength." He set his empty cup aside. "I came in because I don't like bullies, whether they are wearing badges or standing behind town council votes." Before Victoria could respond, the door rattled with another knock, this one more forceful. Thorn stood smoothly, his hand instinctively moving toward his hip where Victoria noticed for the first time the holstered revolver. "Miss Davenport," Sheriff Wilson's voice called through the door. "Open up. Got some papers for you from the mayor." Victoria rose, straightening her shoulders. "Please stay, Mr. Forrester. I may need a witness." She opened the door to find the sheriff looking uncomfortable, a document in his hand. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Thorn standing behind her. "Didn't realize you had company," the sheriff said, his gaze suspicious. "Who might you be, Mr. Thomas Forrester?" Thorn replied evenly. "Just passing through, buying books." The sheriff looked skeptical but returned his attention to Victoria. "This here's the official notice from the town council. You've got 30 days to either sell the business or challenge the decision at the next council meeting." He held out the paper. "Sorry about this, Victoria. It's nothing personal." "It feels very personal, Sheriff," she replied, taking the document, "but thank you for the delivery." As the sheriff turned to go, he paused. "Word of advice, Miss Davenport. Might not be wise to entertain strange men in your shop when you're alone, especially now. People talk." Victoria felt a flash of anger. "People in paradise talk regardless of what I do, Sheriff. Good day to you." She closed the door with more force than necessary, then leaned against it, the paper crumpled in her fist. 30 days, she murmured. "How generous of them." Thorn moved back to his chair, his expression thoughtful. "When's the council meeting?" 2 weeks from Thursday, Victoria replied, setting the notice on the counter without bothering to read it further. "But it won't matter. They've already decided." "Maybe," Thorn agreed, "but decisions can be changed when the right pressure is applied." Victoria looked at him curiously. "Why do you care, Mr. Forrester? You said yourself you're just passing through. By the time this plays out, you'll be in California." Thorn was quiet for a moment, considering. "I meant to be. Been drifting for 2 years since Catherine died, but maybe I've been drifting long enough." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Thorn met her gaze directly, "that I might stay in paradise a while longer, see how things play out." Victoria felt an unexpected warmth in her chest at his words. "You don't have to do that. This isn't your fight." "Maybe I'm making it mine." Thorn stood, placing his hat back on his head. "My cattle drive money will keep me in room and board for a month or so, enough time to see if Paradise can live up to its name." As he moved to the door, Victoria found herself reluctant to see him go. "Will you really come back to the shop?" Thorn glanced over his shoulder, and for the first time, she saw a genuine smile transform his serious face. "Count on it, Miss Davenport. I'm a man who appreciates a good story, and I've got a feeling yours is just getting interesting." After he left, Victoria stood in the middle of her empty shop, the notice from the town council on her counter and the lingering scent of coffee in the air. For the first time since the confrontation that morning, she felt something besides despair. It wasn't quite hope not yet, but it was the possibility of it. She flipped the sign on her door to open and began straightening the shelves. Whatever Paradise threw at her, she would face it standing. And perhaps, she thought with a small smile, she wouldn't be standing alone. True to his word, Thorn returned to Victoria's bookshop the following day. This time, he brought something more valuable than his patronage information. Mayor Hollister's brother-in-law is a developer from Carson City. He told Victoria as they sat among the bookshelves during a quiet afternoon. "Word at the saloon is he's been looking for property to build a new hotel. Your shop sits on the most desirable lot in town." Victoria's eyes widened. "So this isn't even about my condition. It's about the property." "Your condition gave them the excuse they needed," Thorn confirmed. "They've been looking for a way to push you out since before your diagnosis became public." "How did you learn this?" Victoria asked, impressed despite her indignation. Thorn shrugged, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Men talk freely around the card table, especially when they're losing." Councilman Phillips had too much whiskey and a bad poker hand. "And you just happened to be there to hear it," Victoria raised an eyebrow. "I make my own luck sometimes," Thorn admitted, his gray eyes glinting with humor. "Though I did legitimately win $30 off him." Victoria couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising even herself. It had been days since she'd found anything to smile about. "Mr. Forrester, I believe you're a bit of a rogue." "Only when necessary," he replied, and Victoria noticed how his gaze lingered on her face when she laughed. "And please call me Thorn. Mr. Forrester makes me look around for my father." "Thorn, then," Victoria agreed, testing the name, "and you should call me Victoria." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of rain that had begun to patter against the windows. The unexpected storm had driven most of Paradise's residents indoors, leaving the shop empty except for the two of them. "This information about the mayor's plans," Victoria said finally. "It helps explain their motives, but I'm not sure how it helps my situation. They still have the votes to revoke my license." Thorn leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. "Knowledge is leverage, Victoria. If the town discovers the council's using public safety as a smoke screen for personal profit, they might not be so quick to support pushing you out." "You're suggesting I expose them," Victoria frowned. "I doubt the Paradise Herald would print such allegations without proof." "Then we get proof," Thorn said simply. Victoria studied him, this man who had entered her life just days ago and was now saying "we" as if her battle was his own. "Why are you doing this, Thorn? Truly?" He didn't answer immediately, his gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. "After Catherine died, I couldn't stay at the ranch. Too many memories. So I took to drifting, working cattle drives, doing odd jobs. Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." He looked back at Victoria. "But watching you stand alone against that crowd yesterday, it reminded me of what it means to fight for something that matters." Victoria felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the small stove in the corner of the shop. "And my bookshop matters to you?" "No," Thorn said with surprising directness. You do. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, neither uncomfortable nor presumptuous, but honest in a way Victoria had rarely experienced. Before she could respond, the door to the shop burst open, bringing in a gust of rain-scented air and a breathless young woman Victoria recognized as Ruth Barnes, the seamstress's daughter. "Miss Davenport," Ruth exclaimed, her cheeks flushed. "You need to come quickly. It's Mrs. Peterson's little boy, Tommy. He's having some kind of fit in the middle of the mercantile, and no one knows what to do." Victoria was on her feet instantly. "A seizure," Ruth nodded frantically. "Just like they say you get. He's shaking something awful and Mrs. Peterson's beside herself." Victoria grabbed her shawl without hesitation. "I'm coming." She glanced at Thorn, who was already standing, reaching for his hat. "I'll come too," he said, his expression determined. They followed Ruth through the rain to Hatcher's Mercantile, where a crowd had gathered around a small figure on the floor. 8-year-old Tommy Peterson was in the midst of a tonic-clonic seizure, his limbs rigid and jerking while his mother knelt beside him, sobbing. "Get back." Victoria commanded with an authority that surprised even herself. "Give him air." The crowd parted as Victoria knelt beside Mrs. Peterson, gently moving her back slightly. "It's all right, Mary. He's going to be fine." "What's happening to my boy?" Mrs. Peterson wept. "Is it catching?" "Did he get it from you?" Victoria ignored the ignorant question, focusing on the child. "Thorn, your coat, please." Without question, Thorn removed his duster and handed it to her. Victoria folded it quickly and slipped it under Tommy's head to prevent injury. "Turn him onto his side," she instructed, demonstrating the recovery position her father had taught her. "This helps keep his airway clear." Thorn knelt on Tommy's other side, helping Victoria position the boy. The seizure continued, but with Tommy safely on his side, Victoria sat back slightly. "Now we wait," she said calmly. "It will pass in a few minutes." "Shouldn't we put something in his mouth?" asked Mr. Hatcher, the store owner. "I heard you're supposed to give them something to bite on so they don't swallow their tongue." Victoria shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. That's dangerous and could break his teeth or cause him to choke. The tongue swallowing is a myth." As she spoke, Victoria was aware of the murmurs spreading through the crowd. Here she was, the woman they feared and shunned, calmly taking charge of a medical crisis while their own doctor was nowhere to be seen. "How do you know what to do?" Mrs. Peterson asked, her fear giving way to desperate hope as she watched Victoria tend to her son. "My father was a doctor," Victoria explained gently. "He taught me how to manage seizures because I have them too. Tommy will be just fine. This doesn't mean there's anything wrong with him. Some children have seizures when they get high fevers." As if on cue, Tommy's seizure began to subside. His rigid limbs relaxed and his breathing became more regular. After another minute, his eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. "Mama," he whimpered. Mrs. Peterson burst into fresh tears, gathering her son into her arms. "I'm here, baby. You're all right." Victoria stood, suddenly aware of the crowd watching her with mixed expressions of awe, shame, and lingering suspicion. "He should rest now," she advised Mrs. Peterson. "Keep him cool if he has a fever. If he has another seizure, just do what we did, keep him on his side, nothing in his mouth, and time it. If it lasts more than 5 minutes, send for the doctor." Mrs. Peterson looked up at Victoria, gratitude shining through her tears. "Thank you, Miss Davenport. I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't come." Dr. Harris pushed through the crowd then, medical bag in hand. "What's happening here? I was told there was an emergency." "Tommy had a seizure," Mr. Hatcher explained. "Miss Davenport took care of it." The doctor's expression soured as he looked at Victoria. "Did she now? Step aside, please. I need to examine the boy." Victoria moved back, feeling Thorn's solid presence behind her. As Dr. Harris knelt to examine Tommy, Victoria heard him mutter, "Probably just a febrile seizure. Common in children. Nothing like her condition at all." Despite the doctor's dismissive attitude, Victoria noticed several townspeople looking at her with new eyes. Mrs. Gunderson, who had been one of the loudest voices calling for Victoria's removal, approached hesitantly. "That was well done, Miss Davenport," she said quietly. "I never realized you were so knowledgeable about your condition." "There's a great deal people don't realize about epilepsy, Mrs. Gunderson," Victoria replied evenly. "It doesn't make a person dangerous or incapable." As they left the mercantile, Thorn walked beside Victoria, sheltering her from the rain with his large frame as best he could. The downpour had lessened to a drizzle, but neither seemed in a hurry to return to the bookshop. "You handled that perfectly," Thorn said as they walked slowly down the muddy street. "You may have changed some minds today." Victoria sighed, the adrenaline of the crisis fading and leaving her tired. "Perhaps, but it won't change the council's real motives. If they want my property for the mayor's brother-in-law, they'll find another excuse." Thorn stopped walking, turning to face her. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat as he looked down at her with an intensity that made Victoria's heart quicken. "Then we'll fight them on that ground too," he said firmly. "What I saw in there was a woman who knows her own worth, regardless of what anyone says. That's the kind of person who wins, Victoria." Something in his unwavering confidence broke through the wall Victoria had built around her heart since her father's death. Without thinking, she reached out and took Thorn's hand, squeezing it briefly. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing in me when no one else would." Thorn's expression softened, and for a moment, Victoria thought he might say something more. Instead, he offered his arm. "Let's get you back to your shop before this rain starts up again. I have a feeling tomorrow's going to be an interesting day in paradise." He was right, though neither of them could have predicted just how quickly things would change. By noon the next day, word of Victoria's handling of Tommy Peterson's seizure had spread through paradise. When she opened the bookshop that morning, she was surprised to find Mrs. Peterson waiting outside, a basket in her arms. "Fresh bread and preserves," the woman said, offering the basket. "It's not enough for what you did, but I wanted you to know how grateful we are." Throughout the day, other townspeople stopped by, some to browse, others just to say hello or offer an awkward apology for their previous behavior. Victoria accepted their change of heart graciously, though she harbored no illusions that everyone's minds had been changed. Thorn arrived mid-afternoon, his expression grim despite the town's warming attitude. "I've been asking questions at the land office," he told Victoria when there was a lull in customers. "The clerk there is sweet on the waitress at the hotel restaurant. She showed me the records. There's already a draft deed transferring this property to a company called Western Frontier Development." Victoria's blood ran cold. "But I haven't agreed to sell. The date on the draft is 2 weeks from now, right after the council meeting." Thorn's jaw tightened. "They're not planning to give you a fair hearing, Victoria. They've already decided the outcome." Victoria sank into her chair, the elation of the morning's small victories evaporating. "So my condition was just a convenient excuse. They never intended to let me stay, no matter what." "No," Thorn agreed, "but now we have proof of their real intentions." Victoria looked up sharply. "The draft deed," Thorn's mouth curved into a dangerous smile. "The clerk made me a copy for a price." Hope flickered in Victoria's chest. "Will it be enough to stop them?" "Maybe not on its own," Thorn admitted, "but combined with the growing support you have from the townspeople after yesterday, it's a start." Victoria stood, pacing behind her counter. The council meeting is in 12 days. That doesn't give us much time to build a case. Us, Thorn repeated, and Victoria realized she had naturally included him in her plans, just as he had done with her. She paused, looking at him directly. I have no right to ask for your help, Thorn. This isn't your fight. I thought we established yesterday that I'm making it mine. His gray eyes held hers steadily. Unless you'd rather I didn't. Victoria took a deep breath, recognizing the crossroads before her. This man had entered her life like a sudden storm, changing everything in his wake. Trusting him meant opening herself to possibilities she'd long since abandoned, not just for saving her shop, but for her heart as well. I would be grateful for your help, she said finally. But I need to know something first. After this is resolved one way or another. What then, Thorn? You said you've been drifting for years. Will you drift away from paradise too? Thorn removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair as he considered her question. I've been thinking about that. The Broken Spur Ranch outside town is for sale. Been empty since old man Wilkins died last year. It's run down, but the land is good. I've been looking for a place to start over. Victoria's pulse quickened. You're considering staying in paradise? Permanently? I'm considering it, he confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. Though my decision might depend on whether certain people want me to stay. The bell above the door interrupted their conversation as Sheriff Wilson entered, his expression uncomfortable but determined. He nodded to Thorn before addressing Victoria. Miss Davenport, Mayor Hollister sent me to deliver a message. The council's called an emergency session tonight to discuss recent events. My helping Tommy Peterson, you mean, Victoria said flatly. The sheriff shifted his weight. That and some concerns about, improper influence being exerted on the town by outside parties. His eyes flicked to Thorn. Victoria bristled. Are you implying that Mr. Forrester is somehow manipulating the town's opinion of me? Not my words, the sheriff said quickly. But the mayor's concerned about a stranger taking such an interest in town business. Thorn stepped forward, his imposing height making the sheriff take an involuntary step back. Is it town business when the council tries to force a legitimate business owner out to benefit the mayor's family? The sheriff's eyes widened. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Victoria interjected, emboldened by Thorn's support. And I think everyone in paradise should know that this isn't about public safety or my condition. It's about greed. Sheriff Wilson's face reddened. Those are serious allegations, Miss Davenport. Yes, she agreed. And I'll be making them at tonight's council meeting along with evidence. The sheriff looked between them, clearly unsettled. Meetings at 7 at the town hall. I'd suggest you both watch what accusations you make without proof. After he left, Victoria turned to Thorn with a mixture of anxiety and determination. That may have been unwise. We've shown our hand before we were ready. Thorn's expression was thoughtful. Or we've forced them to respond before they are ready. Either way, tonight's meeting just became a lot more important. As the afternoon progressed, Victoria and Thorn prepared for the council meeting, organizing their evidence and planning their approach. The copy of the draft deed was their strongest proof, but they also compiled a list of witnesses who could testify to Victoria's competence in handling both her own condition and Tommy's seizure. By the time they closed the shop to head to town hall, Victoria felt as prepared as she could be. Still, her nerves jangled as they walked side by side through the twilight streets of paradise. Whatever happens tonight, Thorn said quietly as they approached the already crowded building, remember that you're not facing them alone. Victoria glanced up at him, drawing strength from his steady presence. That makes all the difference. Inside, the town hall was packed with citizens, far more than usually attended council meetings. Victoria saw familiar faces, customers, neighbors, and even Mrs. Peterson with Tommy at her side. Their presence gave her hope that perhaps the tide was turning. Mayor Hollister called the meeting to order, his round face flushed with what might have been anger or nervousness. Beside him sat the 4 other council members, including Mr. Phillips from the bank and Dr. Harris, who glared openly at Victoria. "We've called this emergency session to address concerns about public safety in our town," the mayor began pompously. "Specifically, the situation with Miss Davenport's condition and her fitness to operate a business frequented by our citizens, including children." Victoria stood before he could continue. "Mayor Hollister, I believe we should clarify for everyone present what my condition actually is, since there seem to be many misconceptions." The mayor frowned at the interruption. "We're all aware of your epileptic fits, Miss Davenport. Are you?" Victoria stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Because epilepsy is a neurological condition, not a mental illness or moral failing. It doesn't affect my intelligence, judgment, or ability to run my business safely." "That's not what medical science indicates, Doctor." Harris interjected. "Epileptics are known to experience mental deterioration and erratic behavior." "That's outdated thinking, Doctor," Victoria countered. "My father was a physician who specialized in neurological conditions. He documented hundreds of cases of people with epilepsy living normal, productive lives with proper management." "Your father's opinions aren't relevant here," the mayor said dismissively. "The council has a responsibility to protect this town." "From what?" Thorn's deep voice cut through the murmurs as he stepped forward to stand beside Victoria. "From a woman who just yesterday demonstrated more medical knowledge and composure than your town doctor." Several townspeople murmured in agreement, and Victoria saw Mrs. Peterson nod emphatically. The mayor's face darkened. "Mr. Forrester, you have no standing in this community. Your interference is not welcome." "I disagree," came a new voice. Mr. Hatcher, the mercantile owner, stood from his seat. "I saw Miss Davenport handle Tommy Peterson's seizure yesterday. She knew exactly what to do when the rest of us were panicking. That doesn't sound like someone who's a danger to the community." Other voices joined in support, and Victoria felt a surge of gratitude as several townspeople spoke up for her. The tide of opinion seemed to be turning. Mayor Hollister banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! This doesn't change the fundamental issue. The town council has determined that Miss Davenport's condition presents an unacceptable risk." "Is that the real reason, Mayor?" Victoria asked clearly. "Or does it have more to do with my property and your brother-in-law's development plans?" A stunned silence fell over the room. The mayor's face went from red to white. "What are you talking about?" In response, Victoria removed the copy of the draft deed from her reticule and held it up. "This is a draft deed transferring my property to Western Frontier Development, a company owned by your brother-in-law, Edward Chambers. It's dated for 2 weeks from now, after you plan to revoke my business license." The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations and angry questions. Councilman Phillips leapt to his feet. "Where did you get that? That's a confidential document." His outburst was damning, confirming the document's authenticity. The mayor banged his gavel frantically, but the room had descended into chaos. "You used my medical condition as an excuse to steal my property." Victoria's voice rang out above the din. "You manipulated this town's fears and ignorance for your own profit. That's slander." Mayor Hollister shouted, but his protest sounded hollow as townspeople began shouting questions at him. Sheriff Wilson pushed through the crowd to examine the document Victoria held. After scanning it, He looked at the mayor with clear disappointment. "This looks legitimate, Mayor. Care to explain?" The meeting dissolved into accusations and denials. In the end, a motion was made by Mr. Hatcher to dismiss the proceedings against Victoria's business license, which passed by a show of hands from the townspeople present, overriding the council's objections. As the crowd began to disperse, many stopped to congratulate Victoria or apologize for their earlier treatment of her. The victory felt surreal after days of fighting what had seemed like an impossible battle. When they finally emerged from town hall into the cool night air, Thorn and Victoria walked in companionable silence for several moments, the weight of tension finally lifting from their shoulders. "We did it," Victoria said at last, her voice full of wonder. "I can keep my shop." "You did it," Thorn corrected gently. "You stood your ground and showed this town who you really are. I just helped with a bit of evidence gathering." Victoria stopped walking, turning to face him under the glow of a street lamp. "You did far more than that, Thorn. You stood beside me when everyone else turned away. You believed in me." She paused, gathering her courage. "Why?" Thorn looked down at her, the lamplight casting shadows across his face that couldn't hide the emotion in his eyes. "Because from the moment I walked into your shop and saw you facing your fears alone, I recognized something in you that I've been searching for since Catherine died. Courage, dignity, a reason to stop drifting." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "And have you found it? Your reason?" Instead of answering with words, Thorn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, his hand gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I believe I have," he said softly. In the middle of Paradise's main street, with the stars emerging overhead and the sounds of the town settling down for the night around them, Thorn lowered his head and kissed Victoria with a gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. It was a beginning, not an ending, the first chapter of a story neither had expected to find in a town called Paradise. As summer gave way to autumn in Paradise, Nevada, the town underwent a subtle transformation. The scandal of Mayor Hollister's attempted land grab had resulted in his resignation, along with Councilman Phillips and Dr. Harris, whose complicity in the scheme had been revealed during subsequent investigations. New leadership brought a more progressive attitude to town governance, including the establishment of a medical fund to bring a new, more educated doctor to Paradise. For Victoria, the changes extended far beyond the political landscape of the town. The bookshop flourished as her reputation transformed from that of a feared invalid to a respected businesswoman with medical knowledge. More importantly, her personal happiness blossomed through her deepening relationship with Thorn. True to his word, Thorn had purchased the Broken Spur Ranch outside town. The property had been neglected for years, but with determination and hard work, he began restoring the buildings and fences, building a small herd of cattle with plans for expansion. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, Victoria managing her shop during the days, Thorn working at the ranch but riding into town most evenings to spend time with her. On Sundays, she would accompany him to the ranch, helping with smaller projects and learning about the operation he was building. It was during one such Sunday in late October that Victoria realized just how deeply her feelings for Thorn had grown. They had spent the morning mending a section of fence damaged in a recent storm, working side by side in companionable conversation. "I never thought I'd enjoy ranch work," Victoria admitted as they took a break beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. "My father always envisioned me becoming a teacher, or perhaps even following him into medicine." Thorn passed her a canteen of water. "You'd have made a fine doctor. You've got the mind for it." "Perhaps," Victoria agreed, taking a sip before passing the canteen back. "But I'm finding I enjoy this life too, the balance between the bookshop and this." She gestured to the sweeping landscape around them, the mountains in the distance and the open ranch land stretching toward the horizon. Thorn studied her face, a small smile playing at his lips. "You belong in both worlds, the intellectual and the practical." "As do you," Victoria pointed out. "Don't think I haven't noticed your growing collection of books at the ranch house. You're hardly the simple cowboy you first appeared to be." Thorn laughed, the sound rich and warm in the autumn air. "Never claimed to be simple, just a man who knows what matters to him." Their eyes met, and Victoria felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. After 3 months of courting, for that was what they had been doing, though neither had put a formal name to it, she knew Thorn Forrester better than she had known anyone since her father's death. His quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his occasional flashes of dry humor, all had become precious to her. "And what matters to you, Thorn?" she asked softly. Thorn reached out, taking her hand in his larger one, his skin sun bronzed against her paler complexion. "I think you know the answer to that, Victoria." Before he could say more, the distant sound of an approaching rider drew their attention. Thorn rose to his feet, hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip until he recognized his ranch hand, Miguel, galloping toward them with unusual urgency. "Señor Forrester," Miguel called as he reined in his horse, "there's a fire in town. The telegraph office sent word they need all able-bodied men." Thorn was already moving toward the hitching post where their horses waited. "How bad?" "Bad, señor. Started at the livery stable. Winds pushing it toward the east side of town." Victoria's heart plummeted. "The bookshop?" It lay on the eastern edge of Paradise's Main Street, directly in the path of a fire pushed by the autumn winds. Thorn helped her mount quickly before swinging onto his own horse. "We'll get there in time," he promised, though Victoria could hear the concern beneath his reassurance. They rode hard for town, the 15-minute journey passing in tense silence. As they crested the final ridge, they saw the plume of smoke rising above Paradise, thick, black, and ominous against the clear blue sky. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, Victoria could see that the situation was dire. The livery stable was completely engulfed, and the fire had already spread to 2 adjacent buildings. Men formed bucket brigades from the town well and water troughs, while women and children evacuated homes and businesses in the fire's potential path. Victoria dismounted before Thorn could stop her, hitching her skirts above her ankles as she ran toward her shop. The fire hadn't reached it yet, but the wind was driving embers dangerously close. "Victoria," Thorn called, catching up to her. "It's not safe. My father's books are in there," she said desperately. "His medical journals, his research. I can't lose them, Thorn." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "All right, but we need to be quick." Together they hurried to the bookshop. Inside, Victoria went straight to the small back room where she kept her father's personal collection, irreplaceable volumes documenting his research on neurological conditions, including epilepsy. Thorn found an empty crate and began carefully packing the most valuable books. "We should take your business records too," he said, helping her gather ledgers and deeds from her desk. "And anything else that can't be replaced." Victoria nodded, working quickly to sort through her possessions. As they worked, the sounds of shouting from outside grew more frantic. Sheriff Wilson appeared in the doorway, his face streaked with soot. "Fires jumped to the Mercantile. You folks need to clear out now." "Just another minute," Victoria pleaded, securing the last of her father's journals. The sheriff's expression was grim. "You don't have a minute." That roof could go up any second if an ember catches. Thorn made a swift decision, hoisting the crate of books. "Take these," he told Victoria, guiding her toward the door. "Get them to safety. I'll grab whatever else I can and be right behind you." Victoria hesitated, reluctant to leave him. "Thorn, go," he insisted, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll be fine." With the sheriff urging her on, Victoria had no choice but to leave with the precious crate of books. Outside, the scene had grown more chaotic. The fire had indeed spread to the Mercantile, 2 buildings down, and men were desperately trying to wet down the roofs of buildings in the fire's path. Victoria carried her father's books to safety across the street, then turned back to watch her shop anxiously. Smoke had begun to curl around the eaves of the building next to hers, the milliner's shop, and her heart clenched with fear. "Where's Thorn?" she asked the sheriff, who had followed her out. "Still inside," he replied, his expression tense. "I need to help with the bucket line." "Stay here, Miss Davenport." But Victoria couldn't stay still, not while Thorn remained in danger. She set down the crate and moved back toward the shop, her eyes fixed on the door, willing him to emerge. When he finally appeared, he was carrying another box, this one containing the records of her business and a few personal items she recognized. Relief washed over her, only to freeze into terror as a terrible cracking sound split the air. The facade of the milliner's shop, weakened by the heat, began to collapse. Burning debris fell directly in the path between Thorn and safety. "Thorn!" Victoria screamed, surging forward only to be held back by strong arms, Mr. Hatcher from the Mercantile, preventing her from rushing into danger. She watched in horror as Thorn shielded his face from the heat and leapt through a narrow gap in the falling debris. He stumbled on the other side, the box tumbling from his arms as he fell to one knee. Victoria broke free from Mr. Hatcher's grasp and ran to Thorn, reaching him just as he struggled to his feet. His coat sleeve was smoldering, and she quickly beat out the embers with her hands. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, scanning him frantically for injuries. Thorn grimaced, clutching his left arm where the fabric had burned away to reveal reddened skin beneath. "Nothing serious. But your shop." They both turned to look. As if on cue, an ember caught on the roof of the bookshop, the dry wood igniting almost instantly in the hot, dry air. "No," Victoria whispered, watching helplessly as flames began to consume the building that had been her home and livelihood. Thorn's arm went around her shoulders, pulling her back as the heat intensified. "I'm sorry, Victoria." The next hours passed in a blur as the townspeople fought desperately to contain the fire. By nightfall, they had succeeded in preventing it from spreading to the entire town, but the damage was devastating. The livery, the milliner's shop, Victoria's bookstore, and 3 other buildings had burned to the ground. Miraculously, no lives had been lost, though several men sustained burns and injuries in the firefighting efforts. Victoria sat on an overturned crate across from the smoldering ruins of her shop, the box containing her father's books beside her. The physical exhaustion of the day couldn't compare to the hollow feeling in her chest as she stared at the blackened timbers that had once been her home. Thorn approached, his burned arm now properly bandaged by one of the women who had set up a makeshift medical station. He sat beside her without speaking, his solid presence a comfort in itself. "Everything's gone," Victoria said finally, her voice hoarse from smoke and emotion. "The shop, my inventory, my home." "Not everything," Thorn reminded her gently, touching the crate of books. "You saved what mattered most. The rest can be rebuilt." Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, his soot-streaked face, the singed edges of his dark hair, the bandage on his arm that he'd earned saving her father's legacy. In that moment, something crystallized within her. You could have been killed, she said, her voice catching. For books and ledgers. Thorn's gray eyes held her steadily. For your books and ledgers. For what matters to you. Victoria reached out, her fingers gently touching his bandaged arm. You matter to me, Thorn, more than any shop or book. The emotion that crossed his face was raw and unguarded. Before he could respond, Sheriff Wilson approached them, his expression apologetic. Miss Davenport, I hate to add to your troubles, but with your living quarters destroyed. He trailed off uncomfortably. She'll stay at the ranch, Thorn said without hesitation. I have plenty of room, and Mrs. Santana, my housekeeper, will be there for propriety's sake. The sheriff nodded, looking relieved to have the problem solved. That's good of you, Forrester. Town council's already talking about rebuilding efforts. Reckon your shop will be first on the list, Miss Davenport, after what you've done for Paradise these past months. After he left, Victoria turned to Thorn with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. Are you sure about the ranch? I don't want to impose. It's not an imposition, Thorn said firmly. Unless you'd rather stay at the hotel, though I hear it's filling up fast with others who lost their homes today. Victoria shook her head. The thought of the ranch with its peaceful surroundings and the comfort of Thorn's presence was infinitely more appealing than the noisy hotel. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. That night after Mrs. Santana had settled Victoria in the ranch's spare bedroom with borrowed nightclothes and sympathetic clucking, Victoria found herself unable to sleep. The day's events kept replaying in her mind the frantic ride to town, the desperate rush to save her most precious possessions, the terrible moment when she thought Thorn might be trapped by the collapsing building. She rose from the unfamiliar bed and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit ranch yard. The main house was modest but solid, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a small parlor. Beyond it lay the barn, bunkhouse, and corrals, all showing signs of Thorn's careful restoration over the past months. A movement caught her eye. Thorn, walking slowly from the barn toward the house, his figure silvered by moonlight. He paused in the yard, looking up at the star-filled sky for a long moment before continuing to the house. Victoria heard him enter quietly, moving around downstairs with careful steps to avoid disturbing her rest. On impulse, she left her room and descended the stairs, finding him in the small parlor, stoking the banked fire. He looked up at her approach, surprise and concern crossing his features. Can't sleep. Victoria shook her head, drawing her borrowed shawl more tightly around her shoulders as she entered the room. Too many thoughts. Thorn nodded in understanding, gesturing for her to sit in one of the 2 comfortable chairs before the fire. Would you like some tea? Mrs. Santana left a pot. No, thank you. Victoria settled into the chair, watching as Thorn took the seat opposite her. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the thoughtful set of his eyes. It's strange, she said after a moment. I should feel devastated about losing the shop, and I am, but not as completely as I would have expected. How so? Thorn asked, his voice gentle in the quiet room. Victoria considered the question. When my father died, I lost everything that mattered to me. Coming to Paradise, opening the shop, it was a way to honor him, to keep something of him alive. But today, when I saw you run through those flames... She paused, gathering her courage. I realized that I've found something new to care about, someone who matters more than buildings or businesses. Thorn's expression softened and he leaned forward slightly in his chair. Victoria, please let me finish, she said quickly. When the town turned against me because of my condition, you were the only one who saw me for who I really am. You walked beside me when everyone else stepped away. And today you risked your life to save what matters to me. Her voice wavered slightly. "No one has cared for me that way since my father died." Thorn rose from his chair, kneeling before her so they were at eye level. His larger hands enveloped hers, warm and steady. "I didn't plan on staying in paradise," he said quietly. "I came here with no intention of putting down roots anywhere. But then, I met a woman who showed more courage facing down an entire town than most men show in a lifetime of challenges. A woman who carries knowledge and compassion in equal measure, who sees the world with clear eyes but an open heart." Victoria's pulse quickened as Thorn reached up to gently touch her cheek. "What are you saying, Thorn?" "I'm saying that I love you, Victoria Davenport," he said simply. "I love your strength and your gentleness, your intelligence and your passion. I love all of you, including the parts that make others afraid or uncomfortable." Tears filled Victoria's eyes at his words. "I love you too," she whispered, "for seeing me as whole when others saw me as broken." Thorn leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "Nothing about you is broken. Different, perhaps, special, certainly, but never broken." When he kissed her, it was with a tenderness that spoke volumes of respect, of devotion, of a love that had grown not in spite of challenges but because of them. In the warmth of the firelit room, with the ranch stretching silent and peaceful around them, Victoria felt something settle into place in her heart. A certainty that had been building since that first day in her bookshop, when a tall cowboy had walked in looking for a good story and found so much more. The weeks following the fire brought significant changes to Paradise. The town rallied to rebuild, with citizens who had once shunned Victoria now going out of their way to include her in planning committees and social gatherings. Her medical knowledge, particularly regarding seizure management, was sought by concerned parents after Tommy Peterson's episode had highlighted the lack of proper health care information in the community. Victoria spent her days divided between helping with the rebuilding efforts in town and assisting at the ranch, where she had continued to stay. Mrs. Santana's presence ensured propriety, though the arrangement had initially raised eyebrows among some of the more conservative townspeople. However, the elderly housekeeper's impeccable reputation and stern chaperoning soon quieted most of the gossip. By mid-November, the framework for Victoria's new shop was taking shape on her original lot. The town council, now led by Mr. Hatcher, had established a rebuilding fund to assist those who had lost property in the fire. Victoria had contributed her insurance money and was working with the builders to create a space that would serve as both bookshop and informal medical resource center, inspired by her father's work. "We could add a reading room here," she explained to Thorn one afternoon, showing him the updated plans. They stood amid the construction, the skeleton of walls rising around them. A place where people could come for information about medical conditions, not just books for entertainment. Thorn studied the plans, nodding approvingly. "Your father would be proud to see his work continuing this way." Victoria smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I hope so. I feel like I'm finally finding a purpose beyond just preserving his memory." "You're creating something new," Thorn agreed. "Something this town needs." As they walked away from the construction site toward the hotel restaurant where they planned to have lunch, Victoria noticed Thorn seemed preoccupied, his usually steady gaze distant. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "You seem thoughtful today." Thorn offered her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just thinking about the ranch. There's a lot to do before winter sets in properly." Victoria sensed there was more he wasn't saying, but she didn't press. Their relationship had deepened over the weeks since the fire, but there were still moments when Thorn retreated into himself, particularly when conversations turned to the future. That evening at the ranch, after Mrs. Santana had retired for the night, Victoria and Thorn sat in the parlor as had become their custom. The November nights were growing colder, and the warmth of the fire was a welcome comfort as they discussed their days. "The new doctor arrives next week," Victoria mentioned, setting aside her mending. She had been repairing one of Thorn's shirts. "Sheriff Wilson says he studied in Philadelphia and has experience with neurological conditions." "That's good news for Paradise," Thorn replied, looking up from the ranch ledger he'd been reviewing. "And for you," Victoria nodded. "I'll still need to travel to Carson City occasionally for my medication, but having a knowledgeable physician here will make a significant difference." Thorn closed the ledger, his expression turning serious. "Victoria, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." The tone of his voice made her set her mending aside completely. "What is it?" Thorn leaned forward in his chair, his elbows resting on his knees as he looked at her directly. "The new shop will be finished in a few weeks. You'll be able to move back to town then." "Yes," Victoria agreed slowly, uncertain where he was heading. "Though I admit I've grown quite attached to the ranch." A ghost of a smile crossed Thorn's face. "I've grown attached to having you here, which is why I wanted to ask." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small wooden box. "Victoria, will you marry me?" Victoria's breath caught as Thorn opened the box to reveal a delicate ring with a small diamond set between two sapphires. It was elegant without being ostentatious, perfectly suited to her tastes. "It was my mother's," Thorn explained quietly. "I've had it with me all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to." Victoria rose from her chair, moving to kneel beside his. "Thorn, are you certain?" "My condition is part of who you are," he interrupted gently. "Just as my past is part of me. I love all of you, Victoria. The good days and the difficult ones. I want to build a life with you, not despite your epilepsy, but including it." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. "Even knowing that it might be hereditary, that our children will be loved," Thorn said firmly, taking her hands in his. "Just as they are, just as you are." Victoria searched his face, finding nothing but sincere love and commitment in his expression. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Forrester." The joy that transformed his features was breathtaking. Thorn slipped the ring onto her finger before drawing her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words couldn't express: the depth of his love, the certainty of his commitment, the promise of their future together. When they finally separated, Victoria rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When?" she asked simply. "As soon as your shop is finished," Thorn suggested. "We could make it a celebration of new beginnings, the shop and our marriage." Victoria smiled, warming to the idea. "A December wedding, then. With Christmas approaching, the timing feels right." Thorn's arms tightened around her. "I can't think of a better gift than making you my wife." As Victoria settled back against him, watching the firelight dance across the walls of what would soon be their shared home, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the despair of her diagnosis to the joy of finding a partner who truly saw her not as someone to be pitied or feared, but as a whole person worthy of love and respect. The wedding preparations unfolded alongside the final construction of Victoria's new shop. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Paradise, met with genuine delight from most of the townspeople, who had come to respect both Victoria and Thorn in the months since the council confrontation and fire. The ceremony was planned for December 18th, with the newly rebuilt church as the venue. Victoria found herself embraced by the women of the town, many of whom had once avoided her. Mrs. Peterson insisted on making Victoria's wedding dress as a thank you for helping Tommy, while other women organized a quilting bee to create bedding for the couple's home. The shop was completed just days before the wedding, a sturdy two-story building with the bookstore on the first floor and a comfortable apartment above. Though Victoria wouldn't be living there, she planned to use the apartment as a meeting space for her newly formed women's health discussion group, an idea inspired by the realization that many women in Paradise lacked basic medical knowledge. "It's beautiful," Thorn said as they stood together in the finished shop the week before their wedding. The shelves were empty, awaiting the books that would soon fill them, but the space felt full of possibility. "Even better than before." Victoria squeezed his hand. "A phoenix from the ashes." "Speaking of new beginnings," Thorn said, looking slightly nervous, "I have something to show you at the ranch. A wedding gift of sorts, though it's not quite finished." Victoria's curiosity was piqued. "Now I'm intrigued." When they arrived at the broken spur later that afternoon, Thorn led Victoria toward the barn, but instead of entering, he guided her around to the side where a new structure had been built, connecting to the main barn but clearly separate. "Close your eyes," he instructed as they reached the door. Victoria complied, allowing Thorn to lead her inside. She could smell fresh cut wood and paint, and the air was surprisingly warm despite the December chill outside. "All right," Thorn said. "Open them." Victoria opened her eyes to find herself in a well-lit, spacious room lined with empty bookshelves. A large desk sat beneath a window that overlooked the mountains, and comfortable chairs were arranged near a small stove that radiated gentle heat. "Thorn," she breathed, taking in the details. "What is this?" "Your study," he explained, watching her reaction carefully. "A place for your father's medical books and your own research. I know how important that work is to you." Victoria walked slowly around the room, touching the smooth wood of the shelves, admiring the perfect height of the desk, noting the excellent light from the carefully placed windows. "Miguel and I have been working on it in the evenings," Thorn continued. "Mrs. Santana helped choose the furnishings. Do you like it?" Victoria turned to him, her heart so full she could barely speak. "It's perfect," she managed finally. "Absolutely perfect." Thorn's expression softened with relief. "I want you to have space for all parts of yourself here, Victoria. The bookseller, the medical researcher, the rancher's wife. All of it matters." Victoria crossed the room to him, taking his face in her hands. "You are an extraordinary man, Thomas Forrester." His arms circled her waist, drawing her closer. "I'm just a man who loves an extraordinary woman." When their lips met, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a building or a town, but in the heart of a man who had the courage to walk beside her when others turned away. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a light dusting of snow that transformed Paradise into a winter wonderland. Victoria stood in the back room of the church, where Mrs. Peterson and several other women fussed over her dress and hair. "You look beautiful, dear, Mrs. Peterson said, adjusting the simple veil. The dress was elegant but practical ivory silk with delicate embroidery at the bodice and hem, designed to complement Victoria's slender frame without ostentation. "Thank you," Victoria replied, her stomach fluttering with anticipation rather than nervousness. "For everything." Mrs. Peterson squeezed her hand. "After what you did for Tommy, this is the least I could do. Besides, every bride deserves to feel special on her wedding day." A soft knock at the door announced Sheriff Wilson, who had agreed to escort Victoria down the aisle in place of her late father. The older man looked unusually dapper in his best suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his weathered face beaming with almost paternal pride. "Ready, Miss Davenport?" he asked. "Or should I say, Almost Mrs. Forrester, Victoria took a deep breath, smoothing her dress one last time. "I'm ready." The church was filled to capacity when the doors opened. Victoria had expected a modest gathering, but it seemed most of Paradise had turned out for the occasion. As the simple piano melody began, she took her first steps down the aisle on the sheriff's arm. And there at the altar stood Thorn, tall and handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his gray eyes fixed on her with such love that Victoria felt her heart might burst. Beside him stood Miguel as best man, grinning broadly as Victoria approached. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Johnston speaking eloquently about love's power to overcome obstacles and prejudice. When the time came for their vows, Victoria and Thorn had chosen to write their own. Thorn took Victoria's hands in his voice steady and clear. "Victoria, when I came to Paradise, I was a man without direction, carrying the weight of loss and regret. In you, I found not just a reason to stay, but a reason to build something lasting. I promise to walk beside you through whatever challenges life brings, to be your partner, your advocate, and your safe harbor. I promise to love you fully, without reservation, for all the days of our life together." Victoria's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "Thorn, you saw me when others turned away. You valued me when others feared me. In your eyes I found not pity or concern, but respect and love. I promise to face each day with the courage you inspire in me, to be your companion, your support, and your home. I promise to love you completely with all that I am, for as long as we both shall live." When Reverend Johnston pronounced them husband and wife, Thorn's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. The church erupted in applause as they turned to face their friends and neighbors, no longer outsiders, but respected members of the community that had once rejected them. The celebration continued at the newly opened Paradise Hotel, where the owners had donated their dining room for the reception. Tables groaned with food contributed by townspeople, and a small band played cheerful tunes as children danced and adults mingled. "Mrs. Forrester," Thorn murmured as they shared their first dance, the name still new and wonderful on his lips. "How does it feel?" Victoria smiled up at him, her eyes shining. "Like the beginning of our best chapter yet." Later, as they prepared to depart for the ranch, now their shared home, Victoria found herself surrounded by the women of Paradise. Mrs. Gunderson, once her harshest critic, pressed a package into her hands. "It's a journal," the older woman explained, "for recording your medical observations. Dr. Matthews mentioned you might assist him occasionally with research, and we all thought you should have something proper to write in." Victoria accepted the gift with genuine gratitude, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you. This means a great deal to me." "We're the ones who should be thanking you," Mrs. Peterson interjected, "for showing us that differences aren't something to fear. You've changed Paradise for the better, Victoria." As Victoria and Thorn rode toward the ranch in the wagon decorated with ribbons and good wishes by the townspeople, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting down from the darkening sky. "Happy?" Thorn asked, his arm secure around her shoulders as he guided the horses. Victoria leaned against him, content in a way she had never thought possible. "More than I can say." "And you?" Thorn's kiss was his answer, warm and tender in the winter twilight. As the lights of the broken spur appeared in the distance, Victoria felt the final pieces of her heart healing, not because her epilepsy had disappeared, but because she had found a place and a person who accepted all of her, without condition or reservation. The town had turned their backs on her condition, but Thorn had turned around and walked beside her. And in doing so, he had shown an entire community that love could overcome fear. that understanding could defeat ignorance, and that even in the rugged landscape of the Nevada Territory, paradise could indeed be found. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the Broken Spur Ranch as Victoria Forrester closed the ledger on her desk with a satisfied sigh. The ranch had flourished under Thorn's careful management, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the county. The herd now numbered over 500 head, and the once dilapidated buildings had been transformed into a thriving homestead. Victoria rose from her desk in the study Thorn had built for her, stretching to ease the stiffness in her back. At 27, she still maintained the bookshop in town 3 days a week, but much of her time was now devoted to the ranch and her growing family. Outside the window, she could see Thorn in the corral with their 4-year-old son, James, carefully guiding the boy on his first pony. James's dark hair, so like his father's, ruffled in the breeze as he giggled with delight, his small hands clutching the saddle horn while Thorn led the gentle pony in a circle. Victoria smiled at the sight, her hand instinctively resting on her rounded belly where their second child grew. The doctor had confirmed just last month that all appeared well, though Victoria was careful to rest when needed and take her medication consistently. In the 5 years since their wedding, Victoria had experienced only 3 major seizures, all during times of particular stress, or when she'd been unable to take her medication due to illness. Thorn had handled each episode with calm efficiency, never showing fear or disappointment, only concern for her comfort and safety. His steady presence had made the incidents manageable rather than devastating. A soft knock at the door drew Victoria's attention. "Come in," she called. "Mrs. Santana entered, her weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of Victoria. The housekeeper had become like family over the years, her fierce protectiveness extending to include James and the coming baby. "Dr. Matthews has arrived, Senora," she announced. "He is waiting in the parlor." "Thank you, Elena," Victoria replied. "Please offer him some refreshment. I'll be right there." As Mrs. Santana departed, Victoria gathered the notes she had prepared for the doctor's visit. Since the arrival of Dr. Matthews in Paradise 5 years earlier, Victoria had worked closely with him to document cases of epilepsy and other neurological conditions in the region. Her father's research, combined with Dr. Matthews's modern training, had resulted in several articles published in medical journals back east. Victoria made her way to the parlor, where Dr. Matthews, a thoughtful man in his 40s with wire-rimmed spectacles and a scholarly demeanor, was examining a new book on neurology. "Dr. Matthews, thank you for coming all this way," Victoria greeted him, settling carefully onto the sofa. The doctor rose, smiling warmly. "Mrs. Forrester, always a pleasure. How are you feeling?" "The baby is well." "Very well," Victoria assured him, "and I've had no episodes since we last spoke." "Excellent," the doctor nodded approvingly. "Your consistent management of your condition continues to be exemplary. Many of my colleagues in Philadelphia are quite impressed with the case studies we've documented." They spent the next hour discussing Victoria's notes on several patients in Paradise who had experienced seizures or similar symptoms. Dr. Matthews had established a small clinic in town, and with Victoria's assistance, had created an atmosphere where those with neurological conditions could seek help without fear of stigma. "I've received a letter from the medical college in San Francisco," Dr. Matthews mentioned as they concluded their business. "They're interested in our work, particularly your father's early research. They've invited me to present our findings at a symposium next spring." Victoria's eyes widened. "That's wonderful news, Doctor." "Indeed." The doctor hesitated, then continued. They've specifically asked that you co-present if possible. Your personal experience combined with your scientific approach makes for a compelling case study. Victoria felt a surge of excitement mingled with uncertainty. San Francisco is quite a journey. The baby will be several months old by then, Dr. Matthews pointed out. And Mr. Forrester is quite capable of managing for a week or two, I imagine. The thought of sharing her father's work and her own experiences with a wider audience was both thrilling and intimidating. "I'll discuss it with Thorn," she promised. After the doctor departed, Victoria returned to her study, her mind spinning with possibilities. She had never traveled farther than Carson City since coming to Paradise, and the idea of addressing a medical symposium was daunting. Yet the opportunity to advance understanding of epilepsy, to perhaps help others who struggled as she had it, was compelling. She was still lost in thought when Thorn entered, carrying a sleepy James. The boy's face was flushed from the sun and excitement, his eyes heavy-lidded as he rested against his father's shoulder. "Someone's ready for his nap," Thorn said with a fond smile. "He did wonderfully on Lightning. A natural horseman." Victoria brushed a gentle hand over her son's dark hair. "Like his father." James roused slightly at his mother's touch. "Did you see me, Mama? I rode all by myself." "I saw from the window," Victoria assured him. "You were very brave and sat up so straight." Satisfied, James nestled back against Thorn, who chuckled. "I'll take him to Mrs. Santana. Be right back." When Thorn returned, he found Victoria still standing by the window, her expression thoughtful. He moved behind her, strong arms encircling her waist to rest gently on her rounded belly. "What did Dr. Matthews have to say?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Everything's still well with you and the little one." Victoria leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "All is well. The doctor is pleased with my health." She hesitated before adding, "He's been invited to present our research at a medical symposium in San Francisco next spring. He wants me to accompany him as co-presenter." Thorn was quiet for a moment, his chin resting on the top of her head as he considered. "How do you feel about that?" "Nervous," Victoria admitted. "Excited, uncertain." She turned in his arms to face him. "It would mean traveling for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer, leaving you and James and the baby." Thorn studied her face with those perceptive gray eyes that had first captured her attention in her bookshop 5 years earlier. "But it's something you want to do." It wasn't a question, but Victoria nodded anyway. Father's work deserves to be shared. And if our research can help others with epilepsy be treated with understanding rather than fear, then you should go, Thorn said simply. "James and I can manage the ranch, and Mrs. Santana can help with the baby. Your work matters, Victoria. It always has." Victoria felt a rush of love for this man who had never once tried to diminish her or confine her to conventional expectations. "You wouldn't mind?" Thorn smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I married all of you, remember? The bookseller, the researcher, the mother of my children. I'd never ask you to be less than who you are." Victoria stretched up to kiss him, grateful beyond words for his unwavering support. "I love you, Thorn Forrester." "And I love you," he replied, his hand gentle on her cheek. "Always will." Later that evening, after James was tucked into bed with a story and good-night kisses, Victoria and Thorn sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The ranch spread before them peaceful, productive, a testament to 5 years of shared labor and love. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Victoria asked, her hand resting in Thorn's larger one. "If you hadn't come into my bookshop that day?" Thorn considered the question. "I try not to dwell on might-have-beens, but I'm grateful every day that I did." Victoria smiled, remembering. "You said you were looking for a good story." "Found the best one I could imagine," Thorn replied, squeezing her hand gently. "And we're still writing it together." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Victoria thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from fear and rejection to acceptance and love, from strangers to partners, from isolation to community. Paradise had changed, and so had they, growing together through challenges and joys alike. The town had turned their backs on her condition, but Thorn had turned around and walked beside her. And in doing so, he had shown her that love could be both anchor and wings, steadying her when she needed support, and lifting her toward her fullest potential. In the distance, a lone coyote called, its voice rising clear and unafraid into the vastness of the Nevada night. Victoria leaned her head against Thorn's shoulder, content in the knowledge that whatever the future held, another child, a journey to San Francisco, challenges yet unnamed, they would face it as they had faced everything else. Side by side, hand in hand, with courage and unwavering love. And in that certainty lay the truest paradise of all.